Episode 4. The Day Someone Tried to Forget. There are two kinds of forgetting. The first is the ordinary kind, the slow erosion of detail, the softening of edges, the natural mercy by which the mind releases what it cannot carry forever. The second is an act, a choice, a rebellion. And it was this second kind that entered here after the day the bell did not ring, because once the future stopped arriving reliably, once absence became a thing we catalogued, people began to feel a hunger that had been dormant for generations. Not the hunger to know, the hunger to not know, to walk into a moment unarmed, to be surprised by their own lives. Outsiders would not understand why this would feel like freedom. They would say, "I live that way every day." They would not hear the grief beneath our longing. For us, surprise had become exotic, risk, thrilling, ignorance, luminous. The person who first tried to forget on purpose was a woman named Celeste. I tell you her name because names matter again now. Not in the old way, not as hooks the future uses to pull you, but as anchors, as proof that someone existed in a particular way in a particular hour and chose something that could not be unchosen. Celeste was a violinist, not famous, not obscure. She played at weddings, in small halls, in the seasonal orchestra that assembled each winter like a migratory creature. She was known for a certain calmness in performance, a steadiness. It came, people said, from her remembering. She would arrive at a rehearsal already holding the shape of what the music would become, as if the future had lent her its finished form. After the bell, that steadiness began to crack. Not musically, inwardly. She told me later that it began with a single memory. A small one, almost insulting in its simplicity. She remembered that tomorrow at dusk she would drop her bow, not in a performance, not in a dramatic accident. Just at dusk in her kitchen she would drop it, and it would strike the floor and splinter slightly at the tip. That was all. But the memory arrived with peculiar force. It carried a taste of bitterness, of inevitability, as though something larger were hidden inside it. Celeste tried at first to do what we are taught. She did not argue with it. She prepared. She set the bow down carefully in a cloth case. She avoided carrying it loosely. She told herself, "It will happen, and then it will be done." But dusk approached like a tightening knot, and she realized something that startled her. She did not want the memory to be true, not because she feared breaking the bow, but because she feared the feeling of being handled by tomorrow. She feared the sensation of being a character in a sentence already written. When she came to the archive, she did not ask to record the memory. She asked something else. "I want to stop hearing them," she said. "The memories?" "Yes." "You can't decide what arrives," I told her gently. "You know that." Celeste's mouth tightened. "Then I want to decide what stays," she said. I stared at her. To decide what stays, to choose what to keep, to choose what to erase. This was not how our minds had been trained. We were vessels, not editors. At least, we had pretended to be. There had always been rumors of forgetting rituals. Not official ones, not sanctioned. The kind of whispers people exchange late at night when fear and desire produce the same heat. They said some plants along the river could soften memory. They said certain songs could pull a future memory out by the root. They said if you stood under the tower at midnight, directly beneath the bell, and spoke aloud the thing you wanted to forget, the bell would swallow it. We did not believe these rumors, but we listened. Because in here, rumor is often the embryo of truth. And Celeste listened. Oh. She found the one person who knew more than any of us liked to admit, a man named Jonah. Jonah lived at the edge of town where the roads began to lose certainty. He was the kind of person outsiders would call eccentric and we would call dangerous, because he did not behave as though time deserved respect. He gathered herbs. He kept jars of things that had no names. He spoke to the river as if it were a person. Recorders avoided him. But we also, quietly, consulted him when we were desperate. Celeste went to him with the memory of the bow in her mouth like a stone. Jonah listened without interruption. Then he said, "It's not the bow you want to save." Celeste's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Jonah said, "you want to save yourself from the feeling of being predicted." Celeste said nothing. Jonah leaned closer, his voice softening into something almost kind. "If you truly want to forget," he said, "you have to understand what forgetting is." Celeste waited. "Forgetting," Jonah said, "is not emptying. It's replacing." "What replaces it?" she whispered. Jonah's gaze flicked toward the river. "Something else," he said. "Sometimes worse. Sometimes freer." He gave her a small vial. Inside it, a liquid the color of weak tea. "Drink it at noon," he said. "Then go beneath the tower at dusk. Bring the bow." Celeste hesitated. "Will it work?" Jonah smiled faintly. "It will do something," he said. "The future dislikes being edited." That sentence should have stopped her, but desire is a kind of deafness. I knew none of this at the time. I learned it later from fragments, from witnesses, from the way certain facts become unavoidable when too many people have seen the same thing. What I knew that day was simply that Celeste did not show up to rehearsal. And that was unusual. She was reliable. Reliability, in here, had always been a form of piety. At noon, Celeste drank the liquid. She said afterward it tasted like river stones and burnt sugar. The first effect was subtle. The day brightened. Not in weather, but in perception. As if the world's edges had been sharpened, as if the ordinary had been rinsed clean of expectation. She walked through the market and felt, this was her word, unprotected. The sound of vendors shouting startled her. The smell of bread struck her with sudden hunger. A child's laughter felt like a surprise instead of a remembered echo. She realized, with a pang of tenderness, that this must be how outsiders lived, moment after moment arriving like an unopened letter. But there was another effect. The memory of dropping the bow began to fade. Not disappear exactly, fade, like ink left too long in sunlight. Celeste could still recall that she had remembered something, but the details blurred. Dusk, a kitchen, a splinter. But why and how and when? By late afternoon she could no longer picture the moment at all. She began to laugh. In the street, alone, she laughed. Because the pressure in her mind, the future's hand, had loosened. She could breathe. At dusk, she went to the tower. The square was nearly empty. The air smelled of cooling stone. She carried the bow in its case, as if it were not an instrument, but evidence. She stood directly beneath the bell. And she did what Jonah had instructed. She opened the case, she took the bow in her hand. And then she spoke aloud into the tower's mouth, "I release you." Some witnesses said she named the memory. Others said she simply said, "I forget." No one agrees, which in itself is telling. Language becomes unreliable around thresholds. Celeste stood there, holding the bow, waiting for what? For silence? For relief? For punishment? Nothing happened, no sound. No trembling in the bell, no lightning. Just dusk deepening toward night. Celeste let out a long breath and, perhaps for the first time in weeks, felt foolish. She turned to leave, and then the bell rang. Once, not loud, not dramatic, not like a cathedral. A single note, low and heavy like a door closing far away. The sound rolled through the square and into the streets, into the houses, into the river itself. People froze where they were. Some dropped what they were holding. Dogs began barking. Birds burst from rooftops as if expelled. The bell rang once and then stopped. The silence afterward was not ordinary silence. It felt arranged, as if something had been set down carefully. Celeste stood beneath the tower, rigid. She looked down at the bough in her hand, and then, as if completing a sentence someone else had begun, her fingers loosened. The bough fell. It struck the stone. It splintered precisely at the tip. Exactly as she had once remembered it. Except now she remembered it for the first time. The memory arrived not before but after, like pain. She stared at the broken bow and let out a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite laughter. Because she understood. She had tried to forget the future, and the future had answered by making itself audible. Within hours, the consequences spread, not to everyone, but to enough that the recorders were woken in the night by pounding on the archive door. People arrived breathless, frantic, speaking over each other. "I heard it," someone said. "It rang," someone else whispered, as if afraid to speak louder. "I remembered something," said a man who had been unremembered for weeks, his eyes wide with astonishment. "I remembered something again." But there was a strangeness in these new memories. They arrived with sharp edges, with less context, with more command. Less like a whisper, more like an order. A woman remembered a door closing and could not tell whether it was a warning or an instruction. A child remembered a phrase, "Do not look back," without knowing why. A man remembered drowning and woke with water in his mouth. The future was speaking again. But it had changed its tone. We found Celeste at dawn. She was sitting in the square, her back against the tower, the broken bough across her lap like a dead bird. Her eyes were dry. That frightened me more than tears. "I wanted to be free," she said, when I approached. "You wanted not to know," I said quietly. She nodded. "And now?" I asked. Celeste looked up at the bell. "I know something else now," she whispered. "What?" "That the future has feelings," she said. "And we are not the only ones who can be hurt." The recorders argued afterward. Some said Celeste had endangered us, that she had provoked the future, that she had awakened something we had been better off not awakening. Others said she had done what we needed, forced the future to reveal that it could respond, that it could be summoned, that perhaps we were not powerless after all. Jonah, when confronted, only shrugged. "You can't live in a place like this and pretend you're not in a relationship," he said. And relationships change when someone tries to leave. The children, of course, responded differently. They were delighted, not by Celeste's pain, by the idea that the bell could ring, by the evidence that the world could answer. They began daring each other to stand beneath the tower at dusk. They whispered into the stone. They made small, fierce bargains. They asked for memories. They asked to forget. They asked for impossible things the way children always do, assuming the universe is listening because it so often is. And sometimes the future answered, but not always kindly. That was the day we learned another rule, one we had never needed before. You can try to forget, but the future will remember you trying. It will remember your rebellion, your desire, your refusal, and it will build its next whisper around that knowledge. In episode 5, I will tell you about love. Not the gentle kind people put into songs, the dangerous kind, because in here, love is not only remembered, it is anticipated. And when you remember love before it happens, you begin to behave as though you have already been wounded. You begin to choose your own ending early. And that, more than any bell, more than any ritual, can break a person. For now, if you find yourself longing to forget Ask first what you want to be free from. Because forgetting is not an empty room, it is a door, and once you open it, you may hear something on the other side, ringing once and then forever.